This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We've got a lot to talk about today. I'll have Mark Craig on the show in just a little bit for our NFL Picks segment. Looking forward to that. Not sure if Mark Craig is still licking his wounds after last week's Green Bay prediction of both Super Bowl and big win over New Orleans. Obviously, that did not happen. We'll talk to Mark about that just 1 week. I'm sure he'd tell us to RELAX. Jon Marthaler will join us, too, to talk about the Minnesota United and the challenges ahead for that team. Still thinking they're in good position to make the postseason, even though they've struggled lately and have fallen below that level. Got a little history lesson. Fran Tarkenton Vikings 60 years ago today burst onto the scene in the NFL, and history made, too, of a more recent kind when the Gophers and St. Thomas played in volleyball. But first, what did I miss? So I want to get into the PJ Fleck USC speculation for a little bit, just less in the context of do we think PJ Fleck is going to get the USC job that was vacated this week? No, I don't think he is. I don't think there's much of a chance that he is. You've seen a lot of the names out there. That is a big-time program. Not to say PJ Fleck's not a big-time coach, but I think that will attract a higher, bigger caliber of coach, someone who has accomplished more than PJ Fleck. And again, that's not to say he hasn't accomplished anything. What I want to do, rather than focus on the swirl of that, and Randy Johnson did a good job kind of breaking down where that situation is at in the Star Tribune. You can find that online, startribune.com. This just feels so familiar, doesn't it? If you are a Gopher or even just a Minnesota sports fan of any vintage, basically, you believe two things in your heart of hearts. One, the refs are out to get you. You believe that there is not an evening out process in officiating over the years, that Minnesota teams, particularly the Gophers, maybe the Vikings, have been harmed disproportionately by bad calls than they have benefited from other calls. That is one of the things you believe in your heart of hearts. The other thing you believe in your heart of hearts is that as soon as a coach of a Minnesota Gophers team has any level of success, they are going to leave immediately, and you need to worry about that from the moment they get hired. And I feel like that's happened with PJ Fleck, right? Comes in with some pretty big credentials from Western Michigan, had a undefeated season before the bowl game, just a lot of success with that school, and then he comes in here, has an 11-2 season in 2019, and all of a sudden you're like, well, there he goes. He's going to leave for another job, and he said, no, I like it here. But, there's also this kind of push-pull where coaches are attracted to other jobs. There's other high-profile jobs, and they use these things as contract extension leverage. So what happens in Minnesota is people worry about this to the point that what they almost kind of seem to want, fans, is a coach who does just enough to be successful, but not enough to actually, get another job somewhere. I think of the Glenn Mason factor where he, said he'd pick up the phone. He was constantly kind of looking and watching, but that never really came to fruition where Glenn Mason left. He eventually got fired after a decade. You can go through the laundry list. You had Dan Munson, flirting with other jobs when he was here. You had, other examples of that. Richard Pitino kind of flirting with other jobs while he was here. Nobody really leaves. They could stick around and do okay, and then they eventually get fired. So what I would say is don't worry about PJ Fleck going somewhere else, okay? I don't think he's going to go to USC. Maybe in 3 years, if he's done more here, something might happen. But maybe if he's done more in 3 years, this will be a program where he wants to stay long-term, don't you think? Like, if this is a program, this is a Big Ten team. The Big Ten's getting bigger and bigger in stature as time goes on, as a Power 5 conference. Eventually, there's going to be like a Power 2 conference, and Big Ten's going to be one of them. Why would you want to leave here? And why would you want to worry about that along the way? Worry about having success. Worry about having a program that can beat non-conference teams by more than 5 points, and can have back-to-back seasons that are really successful. So don't worry about this, and try not to worry about it big picture, because this is what happens in college sports. Most of it is leverage, and I don't think this is going to go anywhere, especially with the USC job. Good history lesson in today's paper as well from Mark Craig. 60 years ago today, the Vikings played the first game in franchise history, and they were hurting us right from the start, teasing us right from the start, routed the Bears 37-13 in that first ever game. got everybody's hopes up, and then went 3-11 the rest of that season. Kind of sets us up for kind of the franchise history, right? The good followed by the crushing bad. But go read that piece by Mark Craig. Good stuff from on Fran Tarkenton and just other issues, other pieces of that history in today's Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to StarTribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to have back on Daily Delivery Mark Craig. We are doing a weekly picks segment. Mark does it for print and StarTribune.com. We're going to do it on Daily Delivery on every Friday show as well. Mark, I don't think we did all that great last week, but then again, I don't know a lot of people did. I was dead wrong about Green Bay. I thought that would be a walk for them over New Orleans, and they lose by 35. We both thought the Vikings would probably beat the Bengals. That didn't happen. I mean, it could have, but they certainly didn't play great. Statistically, give me a little bit of the rundown of some of the odd statistics from week one and kind of just your overall thoughts of what you saw on the field.
I had an emailer reach out to me with the tagline, "Thank you." And I said, "Thank you. I want to thank you for your picks." I thought that was nice of him. Then he said, "You made me a lot of money. I just picked all the teams that you didn't." It was that kind of week. I went 8-8 straight up. But the underdogs, these stats are out there everywhere, but the underdogs went 12-4 against the spread, which is
amazing.
One record. 9 of those teams won outright, and 5 of those teams won on the road. So it was, you look at Tennessee and what Arizona, I picked as a surprise team in the NFC going into the season, but I didn't think they would go to Tennessee and just, destroy the Titans. Obviously, the Packers, they go into Jacksonville and they're playing basically a home game because it's all Packer fans, and they get destroyed. I mean, that to me was the biggest shock. That might hold up as the biggest shocker of the season if the Packers turn it around. But some people are picking the Packers to win the Super Bowl. Michael, I have no idea. What
that might have been you last week.
Yeah. And then my AFC champion was the Bills. So I stupidly, one of my survivor picks, I took the Bills. I should know as an old Cleveland guy that don't count the Steelers out. That was another big win, a big loss for people who thought the Bills were going to be a Super Bowl team. So if Sid Hartman was still around, he'd be saying right now it's a crazy league, Michael.
He would, and Mike Zimmer would say of your picks. So other than that, it's been great.
Yeah.
It was how much of that do you, and we'll get to week 2 here in a minute, but how much of week 1 week 1's probably kind of unpredictable every year, right? Because these teams haven't, you don't know what the offseason changes have meant really. We've gotten a peek at it in training camps and preseason. How much do you think this year in particular, those influenced by shorter preseason, teams kind of approaching it a certain way, and especially like the Packers and Vikings who, especially the Packers who didn't have Aaron Rodgers much of this offseason, and the Vikings who kind of, went into the preseason trying to keep a lot of their guys healthy and not necessarily, really ramping up so much for the regular season.
Yeah, you mentioned you get a peak in the preseason. Well, you don't anymore. You just don't. I think Tony Dungy was saying, after all the penalties and everything, I don't know if he was referring to the Vikings game, but, coaches might have to rethink how they handle the preseason. But then again, you look at the Vikings, and the only skill position player that they really had out there in that last one, other Cousins, is lost for the season when Irv Smith goes down. So, I don't envy these guys walking that fine line between, getting a team ready and the fact that this game has become just every time someone steps on the field, they get hurt. I would say that they might need to think about playing a little bit more. You look at the Vikings. I thought the run defense was excellent in the first half and horrendous from about the 2-minute warning when they had that quick 3 and out. The Vikings offense had that quick 3 and out into the second half. Well, that's because these guys, they're playing in 90 degrees and they haven't really ramped up for the season, and you're going to see that. So, I think it's week 1 is strange because we don't know anything about these teams anymore. It's everything is basically, either they don't play or everything is so bubble wrapped. I mean, how would you know anything about the Vikings offense if Dalvin Cook is standing on the sideline? So their problem was the fact that they couldn't stop twitching whenever, for these false starts, the 5 false starts. I mean, in that first half, how do you judge a Clint Kubiak whenever everything's 3rd and 26?
Yeah, it's a good point. So that's, kind of gives you some guidance for week 2. You don't want to overreact to week 1, but are there opinions that have changed for you as we get into some of the specific games and specific teams based on what you saw in that first week?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, the Buffaloes, the Green Bays, I mean, it's not panic time, but if I'm the Packers, I'm thinking, what in the world just happened? And, they'll right the ship on Monday night against Detroit. It's a good time to have Detroit at home on Monday Night Football for them. I think I'm more encouraged by teams like Arizona and the Steelers. The Steelers being written off early is laughable, and so I think and Seattle going into and winning on the road. Another team that people were kind of saying, well, maybe they're going to fall off. You rethink some things just because it was such a weird week, but you got to look and see, like, over the first 4 games if things level out.
So with that in mind, as we think about week 2, are there particular games you have circled on the schedule? I think I want to get to a lot of NFC North games. I've got a few games that I've got written down here, but what are you looking at that you particularly think are interesting or matchups that you like?
Well, I got my upset special, which that was one of the ones I did get right. But, because of the fans coming back, it didn't help a lot of these home teams. But I had the Raiders beating the Ravens on Monday night. And, man, talk about having 2 great primetime games for in week 1, the Bucs and what they did and that Ravens-Raiders game. I thought that the crowd would be crazy in Vegas, and it certainly was, and it helped them. They win in overtime. This week – assuming the Cowboys don't have the other half of their roster get hurt between now and then, they've getting kind of dinged up here, losing a great pass rusher in practice. But I got them up, winning at the Chargers, which, it's in LA, but for the Chargers game, I kind of see that as a Cowboys home game on the West Coast because, just knowing LA fans and how they're not the best football fans in the world. I like that. I'm really talk about the NFC North. I'm fascinated to see what happens in Chicago. I got a feeling that the Bears are going to handle them, and that's going to make that Vikings loss look even worse. But seeing Andy Dalton play against the Bengals would be kind of fun to watch. I think there's got a lot of games in this second week that just based on what happened in the first week, it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I think you're right. The Vikings fans, you always watch. So I had that Bears game kind of circled because of that, and because it's an NFC North game, and all of those NFC North teams lost in week 1, so no ground loss. But yeah, if and conversely, if Cincinnati is able to beat the Bears too, then you're kind of wondering, okay, is Cincinnati more real than we thought, and or are the Bears even worse than we thought? Because I wasn't terribly impressed with what the Bears did in week 1. I think the defense, and again, the Rams will make a lot of defenses look silly this year probably, but the defense looked like it maybe has some slippage there. Did you find that to be the case with Chicago?
Well, I think, they couldn't, Sean McVay couldn't have planned it any better for week 1 because, their one hole that they wanted to fill was a down the field passer. And, I think there was a stat there where Matthew Stafford had a perfect passer rating, 3 touchdowns and over 200 yards passing on balls that went 10 yards or further down the field. So you wouldn't expect that against the Bears defense. So you wouldn't expect him to be, having the deep ball that good. To be perfect going down the field. So it'll be, in the Bengals, obviously, I believe they have a better pass rush, but do they have it to the extent of what the Vikings allowed them to do? People say dumb penalties. Yeah, the 5 false starts were dumb penalties. The 6 holding calls, 5 of which were accepted, were just offensive linemen that aren't good enough right now, trying to block guys that are better athletically than they are. And, when you're not getting beat, you're probably getting held. You're holding. So that was just a horrendous performance by the Vikings. Now, if will that change against the Cardinals? I mean, I don't know. Chandler Jones had 5 sacks. J.J. Watt this is a bad time to be playing J.J. Watt because he's not hurt yet. To me, you got to look at the pass rush and can they hold up?
Yeah, we talked about that on Access Vikings podcast on Wednesday. Like in terms of, like you said, two teams that you held in higher esteem than maybe the start of the year, Arizona and Seattle. Those are the next 2 on the schedule for the Vikings, and Arizona in particular does not seem to present a very favorable matchup, whether it's, the way they shut down, the way they got after Ryan Tannehill, whether it's the way they shut down Derrick Henry, or whether, the way that Kyler Murray and kind of being a dual threat quarterback can stress a Mike Zimmer defense historically. This doesn't feel like the greatest time for them to get, coming off of a frustrating opening loss. This does not feel like an ideal matchup in any way for the Vikings.
This might be the worst matchup to put them up against, I think. This has a feeling of when they went to New Orleans 2 years ago, and it's like you look at it and all the injuries they had, and the fact eventually we found out that Andrew Zendejo was their nickel corner, and you just said there's no way they can win this game. And I actually picked them based on that, just saying that this is going to be an NFL game where a team is just so far up against it that they rally and they win the game. It's hard to say that about this game. I don't think there's any way they win it. But I had it closer than, I think I had it 30-24, something like that. But man, I just don't see it. But things can change if the down and distance is manageable, because then suddenly Dalvin Cook becomes a big part of the game, and then suddenly Kirk Cousins has that play action available to him, and he's not just getting killed. And Kirk is never going to be a guy that goes off script and runs around and creates things on his own. He's got to be part of the system. He's not going to be the leader of the system. So if they control the down and distance and Kyler Murray gives them a couple opportunities with some turnovers, then it could change. So I'd say I see a close game just because I think the Vikings are going to be a lot cleaner this week, and that. But I still see Arizona at home. I don't know how you pick against that.
And the spread on that game isn't that big, right? Is it 3.5 or something like that? Was it the last line I saw, or is it bigger than that?
I saw 4, I think, but okay. I think it's a similar feeling. It's like I don't think the Vikings are better than what they showed.
Yeah.
Maybe Arizona's not as good as what they showed, and they're going to kind of meet in the middle, I think. I mean, I wouldn't be slapping, 7-8 points on it if I was trying to judge all this stuff.
What about, you talked about the Packers a little bit. They lost 38-3, just like you said, definitely the most stunning outcome of the week, and probably will be for several weeks to come, unless they lose at home on Monday Night Football to the Lions this week, which is unlikely. But if we don't see more from Green Bay, even if they kind of scrape by and, pull together a close win against Detroit, what's it going to take to get us to the point where like maybe Green Bay just has more issues than we think, or when does Aaron Rodgers telling us to relax no longer carry the weight that it does usually?
Well, I think you're kind of already there, that they got to prove, if they go, like you said, if they play at home against against Detroit on Monday Night Football and struggle or lose. If they lose, certainly it's, my goodness, then shoot all the red flags into the air if that happens. But yeah, to me it was right now, I guess if Sean Payton can follow up with some more wins and have Jameis Winston play that way, we might hand him Coach of the Year by mid-season, based on how Jameis was before and then just how he played in that game, So yeah, I mean, I think it's time to worry about the Packers, sure, but it's obviously not over.
NFC North winner, how many wins are they going to have this year?
Yeah, there'll be at least one through week 2, right? So unless they tie,
Yes.
Right. So right now, the Vikings, because they lost to an AFC team, they're in first place. So they might have to win though in order to wrap it up. I don't know. I still think the Packers are going to get double digits. I would say 11, maybe 11. What was the last 13? So 11, 12.
Yeah, I think that's probably
someone will break out.
I think the biggest lesson that we got to remember from all this is don't overreact to week 1. Even the Vikings, like Mike Zimmer's teams even his best teams have struggled sometimes at the start of the year. You look at 2015, I think they were 2-2 after 4 games. I think, 2017, did they start 1-2 that year or something like that? And they lost Dalvin Cook, and then all of a sudden they went on a run with Case Keenum playing well. And then even 2019, I think they had all sorts of issues early on, and then they kind of rallied, pulled it together. So his best teams have had some clunkers early on. So I guess not overreacting to any team, but especially the Vikings early on.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know when they went to Pittsburgh with Case in his first start, I believe, and they lost. Everyone was on the ledge then, and it's almost like, well, just play for the draft pick, and it's not even the end of September. And I was like, wouldn't you want to fight a little bit before you give up? And then Case in his horseshoe just kind of carried him through that season. It was kind of a fun season just because everything really seemed to go right. When Case was underthrowing receivers, it was, they weren't interceptions. They were, or whenever he was trapped, he ducked and he took off for a first down. And then obviously the miracle. But, there's just over and over, there's so many examples. I mean, Emmitt Smith held out one year. Cowboys were 0-2, and then they won the Super Bowl. Belichick had a Super Bowl team that lost to Buffalo 31-0 in week 1. They end the season by beating Buffalo in total Belichick fashion, 31-0, go on and win the Super Bowl. So, until you're 0-5 or whatever it is, just keep fighting. Like the Vikings last year, I know they put a lot of miles on Dalvin, but when they were 1-4 or 1-5 or whatever it was, and for them to fight back with what they had, available to them at that time was impressive, and it was fun to watch at the time.
Yeah, it was, and it'll be fun to watch week 2 as well. Let's see if the Vikings can do anything in Arizona. Again, tough matchup. Sometimes you see the schedule at the start of the year, you're thinking, okay, this game goes this way, this game goes that way. Then you see these teams on the field, and you're like, games that we thought were easier are now tougher, and maybe vice versa. So 0-2 hole would be tough to get out of, and I feel like they're going to be chasing that Bengals loss for a while this year, just because that was one that you kind of had tabbed as a win, not a loss.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for them to, when I watched it again on Monday, frankly, I was amazed at it was an overtime game. Just by how the first half went, and just all the penalties, and just being so out of sorts. And I really think that they lost control of that game at the end of that first half with those 2 36-second windows where the Bengals score to tie it up. The Vikings do one of those. It wasn't Kirk's fault because there was a penalty on Rashad Hill, but one of those classic 3-and-outs that take 36 seconds, and then they turn around and the defense goes back on the field, and the Bengals score in 36 seconds and take a 14-7 with the ball in the second half. And then they score on that first drive. And it's after that point, they started playing better, cleaner, but by that time the defense was worn out.
Yeah, definitely. It was, and the fact that they were in a position to win that game was remarkable given all that. So we'll see what happens on Sunday. As always, Mark Craig, good stuff. We'll do this again next week. All right.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Good stuff from Mark Craig. As usual, we'll see if take his picks for what they are worth. If you want to fade him to try to make money, go ahead, but do it at your own risk. Mark's been doing this for a long time. One bad week, like the Packers would say, does not define your season.
Back on Daily Delivery, Jon Marthaler. He's covering Minnesota United soccer for us right now, and had the misfortune of watching whatever that was in Kansas City the other night, 4-0 Loons loss, and it doesn't get much easier or lower stakes, I guess, for Minnesota United coming up, does it, John?
Yeah, they had a week of 3 games this week where they were playing teams above them in the Western Conference standings. They've lost the first 2 now. The first 2 are on the road in Seattle and at Kansas City, the aforementioned disaster. And I think what Adrian Heath said before the week, or I guess after the first game of the week, is he was hoping for 4 or 5 points out of this week, and now they're down to a maximum of 3. But it really does make Saturday's game against the Los Angeles Galaxy a must win for them.
Yeah, they've fallen below that 7 spot. And again, there's season left, so it's not like, desperation. But, when you fall below that level, then it starts to be, well, every game that you lose is you're losing ground. And that's what they did the other night, right? Because they were 6th going in, and then 2 teams jumped over them as the night went on.
Yeah, about 5 weeks ago, they were playing the Galaxy at home, and right then they were thinking about jumping up into the top 4 of the Western Conference. They lost that day. They've been sort of struggling since then, and it's really been going backwards to the point that now it's more about making the playoffs than I think jumping into those top 4, which would get them a home playoff game. It's not to say it's impossible. The Galaxy, since that game, as much as the Loons have been struggling, I think they've got 5 points in the 5 games. I think the Galaxy have 3 points in those 5 games. So the Galaxy aren't running away with anything either. And the Loons could easily drag them back into this 6 or 7 way battle for the last 3 or 4 playoff spots. But it's got to happen soon.
And then big problem lately has been the offense. I know they gave up 4 goals against Kansas City, but a lot of their attacking players have been injured, and those who have taken their place haven't been able to, finish all that often. What is the status of some of these key players who, had been driving some of the offense? Are they anywhere near a return soon?
Yeah, their leading scorer, who's Robin Lode, he actually played against Kansas City in the second half. That was his first game back in sort of that aforementioned 5-week period. Emmanuel Reynoso, who is obviously the key to everything they do offensively. What Adrian Heath said after the game was that he just wasn't quite ready for Kansas City on Wednesday. It was a game, not a game time decision, but a game day decision that they decided not to play him on Wednesday. So what he said after the game was that he should be ready for this weekend. Now, the troubling thing is that you go back to the Houston game, which I think at this point was almost 3 weeks ago. Before that game, they were also saying the same optimistic things about, well, we got a 2-week break after this game. Hopefully everybody will be back on the field after that. And it seems like nobody got healthy over that 2-week break, and they had the exact same problems that they did before the break. They couldn't even fill out their bench against Kansas City. They're allowed 9 spots on the bench, and they only had 6 guys on the bench, and 2 of them were goalkeepers.
And the goalies score, John.
It's happened. It can happen. There's been a lot of speculation on which backup goalie would be the best potential striker, which sort of gives you an indication of how the online folks and the people on Twitter are feeling about the Loons attack right now.
Well, that brings me to a couple more things for you here as we wrap up. One, are injuries are telling the story right now? Is this team's problem deeper than that, though? Or do you feel like once they get healthy, they've, got a good chance to make the playoffs, and not just make the playoffs, but be competitive and, have a chance at achieving the goals with preseason were to be a real contender in this Western Conference?
Yeah, once they do get healthy, I think it's a different team. I think you're talking about a different team if everyone had stayed healthy, and we're talking about a different scenario if everyone had stayed healthy. That said, it has exposed slight depth problems in the sense that they've got a guy like Adrien Hunou, who just is really struggling right now, but he starts every game and he plays most of the game.
We're getting down to it in the season. Probably another 10 matches left or so. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think 11. I think the Loons have played 23. Just about everyone else around them has played 24. They'll make one up during the October international break.
So still plenty of time, but it's starting to feel like, and I wrote and talked about this a little bit the other day. Like this is a disappointing year. And again, you can point to injuries, but this feels to me like a team that had much loftier goals than just kind of muddling through the middle of this conference.
I don't think it's a disappointing year yet. I think it really comes down to the playoffs. You look back a couple years, they had a home playoff game 2 years ago, and then they lost to the Galaxy in the playoffs. That felt like a disappointing year just because they went nowhere. Then last year they get into the playoffs, they go on a run, they beat Kansas City in a cathartic game for anybody who's watched Minnesota Kansas City games over the past few years. A cathartic game, and that feels like a successful season. So just getting into the playoffs, and I think gives them a chance for success. So, and they're still, despite being below the line, I think they're still somewhat well positioned to do that.
Big one against the Galaxy this weekend. Jon Marthaler, good stuff. Follow his coverage, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. John, we'll do this again soon, all right?
That'd be great. It's nice when you remember that the United exists.
I'm a soccer guy. Soccer kisser-upper. Soccer kisser-upper.
I remember that.
Enjoyed that conversation with Jon Marthaler. As always, big one for the Loons this weekend. I will be watching, and I hope you are too. Let's finish with the cooler. History made on Thursday night. Gophers and St. Thomas played in volleyball. First time St. Thomas and the Gophers have played each other in any sport as Division I opponents. Gophers cruise to a 3-set win. Doesn't really matter, though. The biggest thing is the history of it. And as we think about St. Thomas building their program, can they become a rival to the Gophers in some sports, including volleyball, basketball? It's going to take some time, but it could be a pretty cool thing for this state if and when that develops. That'll do it for me this week and on this day. Join me on Monday. Expected to have Patrick Royce talking more Vikings at Arizona on Sunday, talking Gophers at Colorado on Saturday. Should be a fun weekend of sports. Get outside too if you would. And while you're outside, maybe listen to this podcast, download it, write a review. I don't know. That's your business, not mine. We'll see you on Monday.